Λοιπόν, κυρίες και κύριοι, νομίζω ότι είμαστε έτοιμοι για να κάνουμε μια βουτιά σε έναν εξαιρετικά ενδιαφέροντα, περίπλοκο, για μας τους Σαδαείς κάπως δυσνόητο κόσμο, τον κόσμο της βιοτεχνολογίας, που είναι ένα από τα πεδία τα οποία τις τελευταίες δεκαετίες έχει κάνει την πιο εντυπωσιακή πρόοδο, που έχει υποστεί τις μεγαλύτερες αλλαγές. Αυτήν την συζήτηση, κανονικά, βάσει προγράμματος, θα την διεύθυνε ένας άνθρωπος πολύ καταλληλότερος από εμένα γι' αυτό, ο κύριος Βασίλης Κοντοζαμάνης. Είχε μια μικρή περιπέτεια της υγείας. Δράτω με της ευκαιρίας να του ευχηθώ περαστικά. Είμαι σίγουρος ότι, όπως τόσα άλλα, θα τα καταφέρει και με αυτό. Ο συνομιλητής μου είναι ένας άνθρωπος που ξεκίνησε από τη Θεσσαλονίκη, διέσχισε τον Ατλαντικό σε μια περιπετειώδη μετάβαση και βρέθηκε να είναι επικεφαλής μιας από τις πιο σημαντικές, τις πιο δραστήριες εταιρείες βιοτεχνολογίας στον κόσμο, της Biogen. Υποδεχτείτε, έστω και από δορυφορικά. Θα ήταν πολύ ωραίο να σας είχαμε εδώ τον κύριο Στέλιο Παπαδόπουλο, πρόεδρο της εταιρείας Biogen. Κύριε Παπαδόπουλε, καλημέρα στην Μασαχουσέτη, καλησπέρα από τους Δελφούς.
Καλημέρα σας, κύριε Τσίμα, από τη Νέα Υόρκη.
Είστε Νέα Υόρκη, οκ.
Νέα Υόρκη, ναι, πάντα. Επικοινώνησα σήμερα το πρωί με τον κύριο Κοντοζαμάνη, η υγεία του βελτιώνεται, οπότε όλα θα πάνε καλά στο τέλος. Αυτή είναι η ελπίδα και η ευχή μας. Και λυπάμαι που σας βλέπω μόνος σας στην σκηνή επάνω. Εύχομαι του χρόνου τέτοιο καιρό να τα πούμε από κοντά.
Ναι, θα ήταν πολύ ωραίο να σας είχαμε στους Δελφούς. Γιατί μας έλειψαν οι Δελφοί τα 2 προηγούμενα χρόνια λόγω COVID και πραγματικά όσοι είμαστε εδώ φέτος το απολαμβάνουμε διπλά και τριπλά που έχουμε την ευκαιρία να είμαστε εδώ. Λοιπόν, πώς θα θέλατε να κάνουμε τη συζήτηση? Τα ελληνικά σας είναι καλά. Αν προτιμάτε να μιλήσουμε στα αγγλικά, ας προσαρμοστούμε σε αυτό.
Θα πρότεινα το εξής. Μπορείτε να μου κάνετε ερωτήσεις στα ελληνικά, αλλά αν μου επιτρέπετε στα επιστημονικά και επαγγελματικά θέματα, η ελληνική γλώσσα με έχει εγκαταλείψει λιγάκι μετά από 55 χρόνια στην Αμερική, οπότε θα απαντώ στα αγγλικά, αν επιτρέπετε.
Λοιπόν, καταρχήν ήθελα να σας ρωτήσω, γιατί στην πραγματικότητα δεν έχουμε βγει, αλλά έχουμε πίσω μας 2 χρόνια, είναι σχεδόν η επέτειος, από τη φάση αυτής της πανδημίας που διήρκεσε πολύ, μας ταλαιπώρησε πολύ και αναρωτιέμαι αν η μάχη με τον COVID απορρόφησε πάρα πολλούς πόρους, πάρα πολύ επιστημονικό δυναμικό και ένα μεγάλο μέρος της προσοχής του κοινού, των ανθρώπων και των πολιτικών ηγεσιών, ώστε να έμεινε πίσω η έρευνα, η φροντίδα για όλες τις άλλες ασθένειες που βασανίζουν τους ανθρώπους. Συνέβη αυτό στα αλήθεια ή όχι?
Well, yes and no. To be precise, you're absolutely right. The concern over the pandemic consumed a great deal of attention, funds, time consumed by the scientific community, the industrial community. That is totally true. And I would say there's been some delay in a number of clinical studies that most of us were conducting. And all of a sudden, because of the pandemic, there was a difficulty in accrual. There was difficulty in treating some patients in hospital settings because hospitals throughout the world were overwhelmed with COVID patients. But I am not sure, deep down at the very basic level of innovation, there's been any true delay or handicap. I think ideas keep on emerging, young companies keep on getting started, the early exciting work continues. So in some ways you could even argue the attention paid by the world on innovation and the value of innovation in saving humanity has supported the idea that we should be looking toward new ideas and new medicines.
Did anything good came out of this fight against COVID-19, against the pandemic? I mean, both scientifically or from the point of view of companies like Biogen and others who are in the field of medical and chemical and bio science. Did we gain something out of it? Did the fight against the pandemic leave new knowledge, new capacities, or new cultures, a new set of culture in dealing with other diseases?
Well, it's certainly very difficult to try to identify good things when so many millions of people have died throughout the world or suffered, and some of them suffered with very long-term sequelae. But I would still would suggest that yes, indeed, I can point to good things that happen. I think more than anything, one thing that's become very apparent to all of us, and I would hope to the broad public as well, is that in the event of a health emergency, the industry, government, science can move in tandem in a most amazing way and, and offer answers. And I would suggest if we need to appreciate the magnitude of the success, the magnitude of the effort that was put in place, and the ultimate result in coming up with vaccines and medicines for COVID-19, for SARS-CoV-2. All we got to do is look back. The last time humanity had faced a similar large-scale challenge, which was HIV/AIDS, back in the early 80s. It took a lot longer for diagnostics to be developed, drugs to be developed, and in fact, to this date, we do not have an HIV vaccine available, notwithstanding all the efforts over time. So the conglomeration of input from government, science, and industry has been remarkable. I think more specifically, probably the most remarkable finding, the most exciting piece of science that we can exploit going forward in a very positive way is the understanding of how to use mRNA technology to develop vaccines. And I think the vaccines by Pfizer and Moderna that have been the mainstay more than all the others, I would argue, in vaccinating the population, protecting them. That is leading now to new ways of thinking about vaccines. There's already a lot of effort in flu vaccines based on the mRNA technology. There's thoughts and ideas and programs in cancer vaccines based on mRNA technology. This probably wouldn't have happened had it not been for the intensity of the pandemic. As I was listening to the prior panel, and correctly, one of the participants mentioned that mRNA vaccines or technology was discovered in Europe by a small European company, BioNTech. It's partly true, partly false. Obviously, BioNTech was an incredibly valuable part of the mRNA vaccine co-developed with Pfizer, not to underestimate the contribution of Pfizer in very many ways, but also the technology, it never comes from a single place. There was lots of work being done for the last decade by companies in the US, by universities. So it's really a global scientific effort. But the important point is a 10-year-old effort with mRNA vaccines had not really delivered anything until the intensity of the pandemic forced everybody to work extra hard, to be extra creative, to commit far more funds than ever before. And that's how we are where we are today. And I'm sure, I know Dr. Burla is on standby for the next session. I'm sure he can talk a lot more about that because he is the one in the middle of this storm, in the middle of this great success.
Now, what are the priorities now in scientific research in the field of biotechnology and medical research, and especially for Biogen? I understand Biogen, we all know, is focusing on neuroscience and neurological diseases. So what are the new priorities?
Yeah. Well, Biogen, I will actually speak more broadly. I will say first this. I will let Dr. Burla talk about the future of mRNA technologies because I'm sure he's thought a lot about it. I will briefly touch on Biogen, as you mentioned, is very much focused on neurodegenerative diseases. Alzheimer's is a very big focus for us. We've had an incredible success in almost a little less than a year ago, having the first approval in 18 years for an Alzheimer's drug. On the other hand, the drug has been mired in controversy, both scientific and regulatory and reimbursement-wise throughout the world. And it's a question as to what will come of it in the long term. We will know a lot more about it by Monday when the appropriate agency in the US government will offer an opinion as to how they like to think about reimbursing for the drug. Um, but more broadly, I will speak about what is exciting and interesting, certainly to me, in the world of innovation. And I must say, again, listening to the prior panel, I think sometimes innovation is used casually. Um, anytime somebody can do something new, however complex or important for that matter, you can call it innovation. I don't. I When I speak of innovation, I talk about really being at the new frontiers of science in trying to answer questions that have not been adequately answered before, and they're likely to have very significant impact on the health of the world. So, what excites me? There's a lot of work going on, and keep in mind, innovation first and foremost starts at the academic level and then at the startup level. Somewhat later, the larger, more established companies, come and embrace innovation, and their contribution, by the way, is just as important because an idea is good, but to turn the idea into a product, a reproducible, reliable, capable product that can be manufactured, distributed, and given to patients throughout the world, that in itself is not a trivial challenge. So, back again, new biology, ways of thinking about disease in novel pathways, new targets, that is continuously happening. In my mind, the last time we've had true new biology with very significant impact was 10 to 20 years ago when we started thinking about immuno-oncology. And that is, in layman's terms, can we make the human body? Can we do something to it? Can we trick it? Can we give it some stimulation? Can we make the body itself fight the cancer by using its own internal immunological capabilities? There's a whole lot of drugs right now. Some of the most exciting drugs in cancer, Keytruda by Merck and Opdivo by Bristol Myers, are two mainstays of that space. They are multi-billion dollar drugs throughout the world, have made huge impact in treating disease. So that continues in a variety of directions. I think the areas of gene modification, gene therapy, and cellular therapy is extremely exciting. I personally, I'm somewhat nervous and concerned on the aspect of gene therapy. I don't think we know enough yet to have widespread use of gene modification approaches, but I'm sure we will in due course. I'm more excited about cellular therapies because if you look carefully over the years and you ask the question, what have we done successfully in pharmaceutical products? By and large, what we do well is to interrupt processes that don't seem to be going well. So if there's some malfunctioning enzyme, if there's a cell surface receptor of or in a particular cell type that needs to be tickled, interrupted, blocked, we can do this reasonably well with either small molecules, the legacy pharma approach, or more complex, proteins, specifically antibodies in this case. But if you ask in the question of regeneration, of replacement of missing elements, that is a far more complex approach that requires orchestration of multiple processes. And the body can do this on occasion through its own internal combination of cells and soluble factors that get secreted to recruit cells or to participate in the healing process. We need to understand this better and offer cellular therapies in the form of medicines. Lastly, and most importantly, I think the great revolution in front of us is the advent of data science into the healthcare space. The combination of ways of thinking, and I'll use all the buzzwords that are being widely used: deep learning, machine learning, artificial intelligence, to combine all of those capabilities with what we know about biology and medicine. This is bound to yield not only new medicines, but new approaches for treating disease. And this is by far, the most exciting. This I've been thinking, concerned, looking into this space for the last 5 years. And I think the next 20 years will really be the triumph of data science coming together with biomedicine. Now, some things that are being pursued are not necessarily the smartest, but time will tell us what to do. To keep in mind one very important thing, people are used to understanding data science and use the word big data along with it. In biology and medicine, we really don't have big data. We have complex multidimensional data because for every particular event we measure, there are very many parameters that play a role, and these are all related to the one measurement, one patient. It's not like you're gonna, measure, 10 billion, voice samples and arrive at some conclusions to whether the patient is depressed or not. So we need to be thoughtful, but we are. I have no doubt. And this marriage of data with biomedicine is going to define the next 20 years.
Now, let me insist on one point that you already mentioned. It struck me when the news came out that a new drug is developed and tried to cure Alzheimer, I was impressed by the number of human lives that are affected by Alzheimer's disease and the prospect, the multiplication of human lives affected by Alzheimer's disease. So I'm eager to hear from you some news on where we are. I understand that there is a new treatment that is under trial. Where are we? In which phase? How soon can we get something? And what kind of what's the approach of this new treatment?
Yeah, Alzheimer's is a very complicated disease, and in fact, part of the controversy that's going on is because there are different schools of thought as to what is the key element in the process of a patient developing Alzheimer's. So the central theme is the following. It has been well known for the last 100 plus years that the majority, not all, the majority of patients who die from Alzheimer's demonstrate plaques and tangles in their brain. And these plaques consist of a molecule called amyloid beta. There's been a controversy for decades as to whether, in fact, amyloid beta causes Alzheimer's or it's simply the result of a process of unrelated origins leading the patient to the condition, and as a byproduct of that other process, amyloid is deposed and forms the plaques. I actually take a somewhat agnostic position in this debate. I cannot argue definitively that amyloid beta causes Alzheimer's, although there's a lot of evidence, including genetic evidence, pointing to that. But I'm fairly convinced that removing amyloid, particularly before it piles up too much, in early stage patients, what we call prodromal, or people with mild cognitive impairment, if you do that, you will do some good. Not an enormous amount of good, but you will do some good. I think the Food and Drug Administration in the US came to the same conclusion, and on June 7th of the prior year, 2021, offered an approval for the Biogen drug called aducanumab, Aduhelm commercial name, on an accelerated basis, meaning telling us, please go ahead, begin promoting this compound, this drug, let physicians use it as appropriate, but also conduct yet another study, a controlled study, a very large study, and if in 3, 4, 5, 10 years' time, whatever the appropriate time is, that study yields definitive results supporting the contention that the drug works, then we'll give you full approval. The problem arose that part of the scientific community philosophically does not believe amyloid is key to the disease, notwithstanding that FDA looked at our data exhaustively and concluded in their experience and knowledge that it does. And of course, the issue of price came up because, as you heard before from Mr. Papadopoulos and others in the panel, innovative drugs, particularly if they're biologics, which have a significant cost of production, they are more expensive than the conventional small molecules, or perhaps in most instances, generic drugs. So the fear that all of a sudden, all 5, 6, 7 million Americans who have Alzheimer's, will be taking a drug that costs tens of thousands of dollars and bankrupting the government, was of concern. Now, a lot of that is politically motivated. Our clinical trials were strictly for early stage patients. Nowhere near this $5-6 million number would be qualified under the label of the approval. We were not intending to commercialize the drug in all these patients. We're prepared to offer appropriate discounts in all places we could. Part of the problem, again, is a technical problem. In the US, most patients over 65 are supported by the national healthcare system, something called Medicare. The drugs which are being infused into patients in a hospital or doctor's office are covered in the Medicare Part B, and by law, patients have to pay 20% of the cost of the drug out of pocket, and that could be a significant amount of money. So I can see that we're running out of time. I'll just simply conclude by saying the following. On April 11th is the due date by which the government, the US government, will offer a final opinion on how they intend to compensate for the drug. It may well be that that opinion is one that allows us to go out there and commercialize it aggressively, or it could easily be, certainly the preliminary version of the opinion would suggest that they would be highly restrictive, which would mean that the drug will not be broadly available to patients in the US. No other country has offered approval so far, so that rules out Europe, Japan, China, and the like. On the positive side, we again, Biogen, along with our partner SKAI from Japan, we're developing yet another drug in the same class. It's called lecanemab. That drug, we will know the data on those trials later this year. Eli Lilly is developing their own version of a molecule, again with the same biology called donanemab. They will know preliminary data later this year, or full data next year. And Roche has got yet another molecule, gantenerumab, and data will be forthcoming later this year, early next year again from trials as well. So I'm optimistic one of these drugs will find widespread use, and I'm fairly optimistic they're all likely to work more or less along the same way as aducanumab works.
Thank you very much for this insight. Ευχαριστούμε πολύ, κύριε Παπαδόπουλε. Ελπίζω να σας δούμε στους Δελφούς ή στη Θεσσαλονίκη.
Θεσσαλονίκη.
Καλύτερα στη Θεσσαλονίκη.
Σας ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ και χαιρετισμούς στον κύριο Μπουρλά που έρχεται μετά από μένα.
Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. Καλή σας ημέρα.
Yeah.